Yo, what's up YouTube? Welcome back to another video. So today I want to go over the changes based on the patch notes that I've made here to my POBs. I've got a few different League Starter POBs for a gas arrow build on a few different ascendancies. Now the first big change that they made was they nerfed quiver scaling, so you cannot get nearly as much quiver effect from like jewels, as well as they've nerfed the actual quiver cluster here, but they are adding another quiver cluster, so we're gonna have to wait and see what that one's gonna be like, and that one should be like over here somewhere. As well as they remove some of these jewel sockets, so we're not gonna be able to benefit from easy jewel sockets here to get more jewels. But those are some of the main changes. Also, they've nerfed Combat Frenzy to the point where the whole like charge infusion setup is not really worth doing. We can only get about one charged up attack every like 2 seconds, which damage wise wasn't even worth it, and especially with not having many good supports left over for that, it was just not even worth it taking. It was like less than 10% more damage for that ascendancy point, so I decided to drop that. I think you need a build that's very built around that whole charge setup, and like designed specifically for that, and then using all your best supports on your charged infusion attack, and then maybe you could make that work as a good build. But for this setup, when we're using gas arrow here as our main skill, it just turned out not to be so great. So I think the option to use as the last ascendancy point would probably be the leech. Elemental damage can leech, could be nice. And then maybe there's some options to use what is that, belt, the soul tether here to be able to get energy shield leech. Might be an option, maybe, if leech ends up being okay. Or you could take the life flasks and mana flasks, both recover both life and mana, just to get more sustain in maps and on bosses. That could also be kind of nice. But as far as ascendancy points go, I think the crit chance, the penetrate ones, and as well as the open weakness, the first open weakness one that gives you like roughly 20% more damage, those are the main three to go for. And then after that, it's kind of up to you. So as far as the skills go, not much has changed besides we now have to use Ice Bite in our main skill, and we've therefore had to drop Bullseye, and that has led to us having a little bit less total evasion, or sorry, accuracy rating here on our main skill, which has led to our crit chance, dropping down to around 8, maybe 9% roughly. Versus the prior 10%. So you're not going to be getting as much crit from that first ascendancy, but 8% base crit is still pretty damn good to get. And then we're using, concentrated effect now in the main skill to get some of that damage back. We want to get as much single target damage as possible, and then relying more on our heralds to help with the AoE. And we're using 2 of those now with Herald of Ice and Herald of Thunder. Ghost Dance is pretty much unchanged. Wind Dancer got a significant nerf, but I've already done the math here for that. Lowered it to level 4. And now it's only giving us 2 stacks to simulate that it's only now 30% more evasion. And if I turn this on and off, as you can see, it's only like 5% more evade chance. So I'm not even sure if this is really even worth running anymore. We'll have to see. Maybe you just put a third aura in, or a third herald in. You use Herald of Ash as well. Could just be better for clear speed. But yeah, Eye Winner unchanged, still good. Voltaic Mark unchanged, still really good. And Freezing Salvo actually did get a slight buff. They made it easier for it to freeze enemies. But in return, everything, all cold damage, has had a freezing nerf of, I think, 48% harder to freeze, or 48% slower freeze buildup. But that's okay, because this build specifically has a lot of extra freeze built up, and we are doing a majority cold damage, so that still shouldn't be an issue. I think they mainly made that change because they didn't want builds just slapping a little bit of cold damage in and then being able to freeze everything. So as a mainly cold damage build, I think we're still going to be fine with that. Now the damage here, this is kind of a boss simulation with the boss being frozen. And once the boss is frozen, we do a lot more damage because we ignore all of the elemental resistances of the boss. So we're using this here to ignore all those resistances. Prior to freezing the boss, however, our damage is much lower. As you can see, we're losing close to 1 million damage without the boss being frozen. So as you can see, it's very conditional, as well as this shock, this 77% shock, is only possible if you have Voltaic Mark up on the boss, and then your Freezing Salvo, which has overcharge support, shocks the boss. And this shock isn't going to last very long because it has 50% less shock duration. So you'd have to use Lasting Shock to get some of that shock duration back, but then you have less shock chance. And I'm not sure if the damage here on the Freezing Salvo with only 69,000 is actually going to even be enough to shock a boss in the first place. So this might not be a reliable way to get a big shock. You might have to use conduction support here to get it to shock. And then that shock is only going to last I think, yeah, 50% less duration and then 100% increased duration. So it should only last like 6 seconds. So you're only going to have 6 seconds of that really big shock to do damage in. So it's kind of rough. There's a lot of conditional effects going on here for our damage, which I'm not a huge fan of. So without that big shock increase, the normal shock is going to be at around 32%. So without the boss being frozen at our normal 32% shock, we're only at 1.2 million. So the damage is kind of, and that is with the critical weakness. Without critical weakness, we're down here at 800k. So pretty rough. But when all the stars align and the boss is frozen and we get that big shock, we can be closer to 2.7 million. And this is with us hitting the boss within 2 meters of us. So we're benefiting from stuff like stand and deliver points here on the tree. So this is kind of best case scenario, 2.7 million boss DPS. Now this is just the Amazon, and this one has, I would say, the highest damage potential with this type of setup. I'm using a dual string bow, and I'm using a total of 6 arrows here on our gas arrow because we're using that dual string, the Death's Harp. And that is a corrupted Death's Harp with +1 arrows and 80 crit damage, so it's a pretty good one. And we're using the accuracy runes to get more flat damage because it has such little flat damage normally. The quiver is double accuracy, % accuracy in the implicit, as well as accuracy roll on the prefix, and double crit with attack speed, so it's actually quite an expensive, quite a good quiver. Probably many divines for this type of quiver. Radiant Grief, you might not need this once you get enough flat fire damage built into your build, but still very nice to be quality of life for being able to quickly ignite everything around you to trigger your gas arrow explosions. The body armor, I'm going for pure evasion because we want to make the most use of the bestial skin point as possible. So 1700 evasion being doubled there. That's the majority of our evasion. The blue flame bracers, like I said, making this a cold damage build so that we can freeze enemies, adding kind of that extra defensive layer and allowing us to gain that penetration that we desperately need against bosses. And then for boots, amulet, ring, these are all pretty straightforward. I've got just movement speed boots and random stats. The amulet, we need spirit to be able to use all our auras. And then I have +3 levels to projectile skills. Should be able to get something like this, especially with the Recombinator. If you got, a few different amulets, you can slam them together, try to get at least +3 projectiles and maybe spirit together, or maybe accuracy. And then we got a breach ring here again with more accuracy, some flat lightning to allow us to shock. Also, I forgot to mention we have flat lightning on the quiver here to help us shock. We want to be able to shock on this build. Since we're doing a majority of cold damage, we want to have that extra added lightning for that shock capabilities. And then I'm still using the Sekima's ring. This is giving us that extra jewel socket. I'm not sure if this is going to still be meta now that they've nerfed quiver effect on jewels. You can't get nearly as much. So maybe you're just going to use another breach ring here instead, but this is kind of the setup I have right now. And then the belt is just straightforward life and triple res. They've nerfed ingenuity into the ground, so I wouldn't recommend using that anymore. Maybe at the very end game, like high investment, when you got like mirror tier rings, maybe then. But for now, just like a good belt that solves your resistances is better. And then the jewels, I have roughly 5 sockets. I've doubled one of them to account for the Sekimas, but I've only put the crit damage and the attack damage rolls on here because the quiver effect has been nerfed, and I'm trying to compensate for the quiver effect we're losing from these, these quiver effect points here that we're losing. This is 50%, but after the patch, it should only be 32%, so we're losing about 18% quiver effect, and that would be 3 perfectly rolled emeralds with 6%, because that is now the total you can get on a jewel. That used to be 15%, so quite a heavy nerf there to quiver scaling. And yeah, this is kind of what you can get here on the Amazon. All right, so let me just rapid fire this passive skill tree real quick. So basically, we're going over here, grabbing quiver effect. We're trying to get some pens, but at least we have some pen prior to freezing an enemy, as well as getting this freeze build up and harness ailments, which since we're applying all the different ailments is going to be very powerful. Then we're taking the blinding strike because as a Amazon, you're going to want to reduce the evasion on enemies so you can benefit more from your accuracy rating to get a more crit chance. So you want to have that blind chance. And then we're taking finesse to get more accuracy rating based on our intelligence, coming around to the monk area to grab all this extra energy shield and evasion rating, as well as some movement speed, which is really nice, as well as crushing wave, which is one of the best crit points on the tree. Then we're taking just generic crit stuff here, moving up into the crit area here, taking all of that. We're taking the spectral ward to get some more energy shield from our body armor, which is high evasion body armor. And then I'm taking lucidity because this is roughly 16% damage reduction. It'll be taken to your mana but for your life, and they said they reduced the cost on attack skills, so hopefully we'll have more mana available to help us kind of get like a miniature mind over matter effect to help us get a better EHP, because without this our EHP drops down to like 8.7k. So I think it's pretty important to help us be a little bit tankier, because this class doesn't have very good defensive ascendancy nodes, so you are kind of made out of glass unless you take something like that. And then we're coming up here, of course, to grab the Thin Ice and the Heavy Frost, because we are mainly a cold build, and grabbing the extra jewel socket. Down here, we're coming over here to grab Bestial Skin to double that evasion rating on our body armor, as well as we're taking Coming Calamity because we're using 2 Heralds, so we're benefiting from both 50% increased cold and lightning damage. And then we're taking all the crit points here that are relevant, grabbing the extra shock magnitude here down with Frazzled. This ends up being around 3.5% damage per point, even without using stuff like Overcharge and Voltaic Marks, so it's actually very high value to get bigger shocks on enemies. This will not benefit your first hit, but your second hit will be 3.5% more damage average per point here. So quite good. And then Stand and Deliver, mainly for boss fights. If you're going to be able to position within those 2 meters, this is a huge damage increase. So we're going to want to take that. And then Catalysis is another good option for that extra elemental damage of the attacks and physical damage reduction. We're taking the Acceleration here for more movement speed as well as attack speed. And then, of course, because we're an accuracy stacking Amazon, we want to take Falcon Dive. And then I've got the weapon set points here for all the mark stuff over here and all the mark stuff over here. This whole mark segment got apparently removed, so I'm not taking that. And we still have some points left over, but I don't know where to put those, so I have left those out for now. So yeah, it's basically a quick rundown of the passive skill tree. This will, of course, change with the coming patch. There's going to be some changes to the passive skill tree. They're adding a new quiver cluster, as well as like some minion clusters over here and some like new projectile clusters and stuff. So depending on what gets added, some of those might be higher value than what I've got here. But this is a pretty like generic, pretty decent template to use. All right, so moving on here to the Deadeye, we have the Deadeye here, and this number might be a little bit misleading. It's not double the damage of the Amazon. The reason why the damage is higher is, of course, because we are now using a dual string, and I wouldn't really recommend playing the Deadeye until you get a dual string, because they've nerfed the gas arrow to be limited only 6 at a time. So if you get a corrupted Death's Heart, you're actually going to be overcapped by 1 arrow, basically benefiting nothing from that extra arrow. So I recommend Deadeye only if you're going to be going for one of these dual strings here that has a total of 3 additional arrows. That would give you a complete total of 5, so you're not overcapped on arrows. And with this setup, because we have that dual string, of course, we're going to be doing more damage because it's a much better weapon than the Death's Harp is. This one, for example, has extra base crit, wed, attack speed, 2 additional arrows, some flat damage. It's quite good. Probably a pretty expensive bow. But yeah, I wouldn't really recommend Deadeye until you can get one of these. Now, the really good thing about Deadeye here with the Ascendancy is just you cannot undervalue how good Tailwind is. 10% movement speed, as well as like up to 30% additional damage reduction here from the Wind Ward Ascendancy is just super powerful at making this Ascendancy somehow a lot tankier than the Amazon. As you can see here, we have a EHP of closer to 16k, so like almost half tankier, like 50% tankier than the Amazon, just because of those Tailwind stacks. And those are going to be pretty much up all the time. So this is definitely a better Ascendancy if you want to be a little bit tankier, have a little bit more movement speed, and if you can get one of these good bows to benefit from your extra projectile from your Ascendancy. So Deadeye is very solid. Now, it does have a little bit less crit than the Amazon, and that is why you want to use a bow like this, because you can get that extra crit as a suffix. So before using this, if I was to put in a Death's Harp here, as you can see, the damage would be quite a lot worse than the Amazon was. So yeah, you really want to be making use of a Death's Harp if possible here for the Deadeye. Let me put that back in. And yeah, basically the tree is relatively the same as the Amazon, except we're not taking stuff that is like accuracy related, like the Finesse and the Falcon Dive. We're going for like just more generic damage points. Instead of getting accuracy on our quiver, we're going for a quiver that has projectile speed as well as damage with bow skills and has a crit chance as an implicit. And then we're scaling our damage here with Feathered Fletching, allowing that projectile speed to be converted into percent damage. And then we also have these really nice 2 little crit damage points here that are pretty good for the for the Deadeye. And yeah, otherwise the tree is relatively the same. Not much has changed. The skills are also pretty much the same. And yeah, that is the Deadeye. So really the only big pluses here to the Deadeye is you're a lot tankier. You're about 50% tankier. You have 10% more movement speed, but you are going to need to get a dual string to make full use of that extra projectile, as well as to get enough crit for it to be a meaningful amount, because without our crit weakness and without the extra like 4 base crit here on the bow suffix, we'd only be at like 20 something percent crit. So it's pretty bad unless you get that bow with the extra crit chance on it. So yeah, that is the Deadeye. All right, now moving on to the Invoker. Now the Invoker has a few benefits here that I really like. And the main one is Sunder My Enemies, allowing you to ignore non-negative elemental resistances against monsters you're critting, which means we do not need to really worry about penetration as long as we have enough crit chance, as well as you get some extra damage as lightning and cold, and or have a little easier time of shocking and chilling enemies. And then finally, you get a lot of free spirit from Lead Me Through Grace, meaning if you have a good body armor, you basically cover all your spirit from that one slot and do not need to get spirit anywhere else in your gear, which is really nice. As well as you just have more spirit overall than most other classes can get access to. So you might be able to fit another aura or so than other classes. So some pretty good things going here for the Invoker. And I've already configured it based on the nerfs. It got a slight Lead Me Through Grace nerf. I've already configured it for that. And so we're at about 175 here total spirit with a pretty decent body armor. Now, when looking at this build here, the big takeaway here is I haven't even ticked, is the enemy frozen? Like I did on the Amazon. If I do tick it, I'm getting a nice little 200,000 damage increase, but it's not significant because we are, again, not requiring ourselves to freeze the enemy to ignore resistances. We have that built into our ascendancy. So the penetration solution is just solved right here through the ascendancy, and we don't even need to take heavy frost. So that is really nice as far as like damage consistency is concerned, for bossing especially. Since you're probably only going to be able to freeze a boss a few seconds per fight, right? Then this, over a long fight, is just going to have much better, higher damage uptime because it doesn't require that freeze to get all the penetration that the other two ascendancies require. And as well as the ascendancy makes it a little bit easier to get that shock, even if we're like a fully cold or mainly a cold build. We're getting 10% extra damage as lightning, as well as we can leave shock ground, which will just, shock nearby enemies, so that when we're using our gas arrow in maps, we can maybe benefit from shocked enemies that we haven't even hit yet to gain that extra damage. And yeah, against also more magnitude of shock, which again is just more damage. So quite good here from the Invoker. The skills are pretty much the same, except because we're going to have about 60 extra spirit, this is where something really interesting comes in. And this kind of depends on the upcoming patch and how good these things are. So the first option here with like the 60 extra spirit is we could go for a Summon Beast. And this is a new skill that's being added, which is like roughly 35% of your spirit, to basically capture a rare monster and have it follow you around and give all of its rare mods to you. Now, one rare mod that is in the game based on the rare monster modifiers is actually Haste Aura. And what this will do is, as long as that monster stays near you, it'll be giving you a 25% increased skill speed and 25% increased movement speed buff, which is massive, giving this class a massive 60% increased movement speed modifier here, if you can keep that monster within your vicinity. So I think just because we have this extra spirit, we have that option to go for a really nice rare monster as a pet, which can give us a really nice aura like this, as well as help us a little bit with tanking and dealing damage. It's going to be able to distract some enemies, so we're not, taking the full brunt of the attacks, as well as it does probably decent damage and provides this amazing aura. So that's one option that we could use that extra spirit for. Another option is, of course, the Roa mount, which some of you guys have seen, which basically allows you to move unimpeded from the movement speed penalty while attacking with your bow. So basically, you'll be able to move at full speed even while attacking while on the mount. So that's another option, which is, I think, also a 60 spirit reservation, and we would have room for that. So basically, this is kind of why I'm leaning more towards Invoker. It has more consistent damage against bosses. It doesn't require things to be frozen all the time, as well as has the option of playing around with either the Roa or the Summon Beast, which could be, you know, in practice really powerful, either for mobility or just for damage. So I'm thinking that's probably why I'm leaning more towards going Invoker yet again to kind of revive my Bovoker build and go for this setup. And otherwise, I think the tree is relatively the same as the other two. I think the main difference here is we are using the North Paw Suede Bracers here to get extra crit. Because we probably won't need as much cold damage. We have 10% of damage, extra cold damage here from the Ascendancy, as well as we're taking Essence of Mountain. So we have at least 15% of damage as extra cold, as well as with our Ice Bite buff up, we're going to have another 35% of damage as extra cold. So we're getting 50% of damage as extra cold, as well as you can get a little bit of cold damage onto your gear to be able to freeze enemies. So we're not going to have to use the Blue Flame Bracers anymore. And so I have opted in for the North Paw Suede Bracers instead to increase our crit chance while using the Death's Harp, which is a bow that has a lot of crit damage, but no extra crit chance. Now, once you get a dual string bow that has a base crit roll on it, you'll be able to swap off these bracers for something else. Maybe you do the full cold conversion and go back to the Blue Flame Bracers. But another really good option, which looks really promising, is actually the Painter's Servant. This is 10% of elemental damage as extra cold, fire, and lightning. And because, like I said, we are ignoring all resistances as long as we're critting, we don't really have any problems with doing damage of all three types. As well as this will convert 33% of our damage into cold, 33% of our damage into fire, and 33% of our damage into lightning, giving us an even split. So we should be able to shock, freeze, and ignite enemies relatively consistently. And so if I was to, for example, just like throw in this dual string here, and then, show these Painter's Servant gloves. And these are not even corrupted. This is like a 7.7% damage increase over the North Paw Bracers, even though we're losing crit. That is just how powerful they are. And you can even get some corrupted ones that have like 11% of elemental damage as extra, as well as you can get some that are have like a higher portion of damage converted to a certain element. So if you wanted to go for more of a freeze setup, you get ones that have like 40% of damage converted to cold. Or if you wanted to go for more of a ignite setup, you get, fire conversion, or if you want to go for more shock, you can go for lightning conversion. So any way you want to go. So I think these gloves are really powerful here on the Invoker especially. So once you get that dual string, I'd probably slap those babies on, maybe get some nice corrupted ones, and boom, there you go. You got 30% extra damage as different elements, which are all going to equally penetrate the boss thanks to our Sunder My Enemies. And of course, this is without the boss even being frozen. Once I freeze the boss, now we're up here at 6 million DPS. And this is, of course, assuming that the Haste Aura works. If the Haste Aura doesn't work, still 5.2 million DPS, even without that Haste Aura. So I'm really liking the Invoker. I think it has a lot going for it. It is not as tanky as the Deadeye, and it doesn't have as, I guess, easy of gearing when it comes to crit chance as the Amazon. But as far as being able to ignore penetration entirely, use all three different elements as we please, as well as having the option for playing around with these new skills like the Summon Beast and the Roa Mount, I think it's just going to be more fun overall to play around with those things and have access to that with our extra spirit. Now, what might happen is if those are bad, then you would probably just slap in a couple more auras. You could run Herald of Ash plus Wind Dancer. I actually do not have Wind Dancer in this setup because we didn't have enough spirit for it. But even if the Summon Beast and the Mount aren't very good, you just run, Herald of Ash plus Wind Dancer, and you make up that 60 spirit there. So it's still going to be pretty strong running all three Heralds plus 2 defensive auras and everything else. So yeah, that is the Invoker, and that is probably personally going to be what I'm going to be going with if I go this direction and play the Bovoker yet again. That is going to be what I go with here. Yeah, we have lightning damage here on the weapon. Actually, I probably should be using cold just because we're trying to be able to freeze things. So again, let me grab the cold here. But yeah, that's basically the Invoker here, 2 million DPS. That isn't as reliant on things being frozen to benefit from that damage. So yeah, there's that. One final option that I forgot to mention is if the Roa Mount and the Summon Beast both end up sucking, and Herald of Ash is kind of underwhelming, well, you can just use that 60 spirit to, again, run our fan favorite good old Blink. So this build will make room for that, whereas the other two builds have a very hard time fitting that extra 60 spirit reservation into their build. So yeah, I'm personally probably going to be playing Invoker. Maybe I'll end up, going Amazon just because it's new and we want to play around with what's new and, figure things out. Maybe I can make that infused weapon setup work somehow. But barring any, new information that makes the Amazon look a little bit more appealing, I think that the Amazon or the Invoker is going to be the way that I go. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I'll be putting these three different POBs in the description for you guys to look at. And of course, take everything with a grain of salt because there's a lot of changes we don't even know about yet. There's going to be some changes to the passive skill tree, as well as there might be some number changes to specific skills that we don't know about yet. So this is definitely not completely accurate, but it's a good estimate of comparing the three different ascendancies and their strengths and weaknesses in a very similar setup. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.